So I am really excited to hear the next talk. I actually don't know Ashley Farley, but she's going to be discussing economic options for global access to medical information, which obviously aligns very much with my interest as an open access journal editor. So Ashley is, hold on a second, sorry. There you go.
Fantastic. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. Ashley, a program officer, knowledge and research services at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and spearheads the implementation of the foundation's open access policy and associated initiatives. At the forefront of innovation, she leads Gates Open Research, a groundbreaking transparent publishing platform. And Ashley's commitment to open access stems from a belief that freely accessible knowledge has the transformative power to improve and save lives. Ashley was also a co-author on a recent paper with the conference leader, Dr. LaGrone, on this topic. I'm going to hope you talk about it, so I won't mention that paper. So go ahead, Ashley, you're up.
Great, thanks so much. I just want to confirm everyone can hear me and see the slides.
We can see the slides in here. You were working on seeing your face, but yes, we've got a voice in the sky.
That's not exciting. So appreciate that. And thank you so much for the opportunity to present remotely. I think that's very important for broader engagement and equity. So very much appreciative of that. So my high-level learning objective for you all is to have a high-level understanding of some of the economics or business models or flavors, colors behind publishing and open access, and how open access has the potential to ensure that knowledge can be a public good. This is a topic that I live and breathe, and there is a lot of detail and information here, but I want to make sure that, in a matter of 14 and a half minutes, that you can get a kind of a high-level understanding of where we are. So I've been at the foundation since 2015. Sorry, I can hear myself. Okay, so I've been great, thanks. I've been at the foundation since 2015, working on our open access policy. Here's a recent kind of timeline of open access as a movement and where we fall kind of into the middle of that. So open access has been around since early 2000s. It's a movement that has been, I think, in my opinion, as somebody who feels urgency, a bit slow, but we came into the scene around 2015. We are coming up on a decade of open access policy, and we've learned a lot, and I hope to impart some of those learnings upon you. We are one of the funders that has a Plan S policy, so if you've heard of Coalition S, we are part of that funder movement, really trying to work with other funders in this space to push and advocate for open access policy, especially for the work that we fund. I think that there's an interesting time during the pandemic where we really saw a strong use case of why open access to information and data was critical in funding and finding interventions. But there's still a lot of work left to be done. So those it may not be steeped in the academic publishing world, kind of how it's worked for many years now is that we fund either through taxpayer dollars or through private funding. Like the foundation, knowledge is created, research is done, and then the research is written up by researchers, and then they submit it to a journal of their choosing. Often that can be pretty much based on kind of the reach or the readership they're trying to get, the scope of the journal, as well as career advancement is a huge piece in this, and one I think has been a major barrier to change is that academic incentive piece. Just want to make it known that typically authors aren't paid by the publisher, peer reviewers aren't paid by the publisher, and publishers do not typically fund the research directly. And this can often lead to what I call kind of needless gatekeeping in the academic space. I should say this disclaimer, not all journals, not all publishers are created equal, and I do talk with them in very general sense. Often, many of my critiques are to the largest for-profit publishers in the space. And I shared, I love this article that came out in Current affairs. This is more about the journalistic or internet space, but I think it's very true. Often the truth is paywalled, but lies are free. As we navigate an environment of mis and disinformation. But I also want to talk a bit about how the idea of academic publishing is there's still very much this persistent idea that there's a certain requirement or level of expertise that is needed, and that is important to protect that. But I think, and oftentimes it also ignores a lot of different expertise as well. So only acknowledging narrow ways of gaining or displaying information, knowledge, and expertise. And this really, I think, comes into play when we want to see this ecosystem become more diverse. I really appreciated the focus on D&I in building out this conference and these talks and the focus. So that's where some of this is coming in, and we need to think, I think, a bit differently about what is a good journal, what is verified, scientifically sound information, and how we communicate that. And often this system can have a very global north view of that. So imagine this being prettier than it is to create more of an open access rainbow. So it's the space, I think, in our attempt to really get to this utopia that I think open access advocates envision, where everything is open access as the norm. We have a lot of different ways and initiatives and trials to get there, and no one kind of one size fits all approach. But one thing that I really wanted to highlight in this is the Creative Commons logo, or the Creative Commons or the CC license. And those are an array of open licenses that permit reuse of the information. And I think the reuse is the most important part to me in open access. Of course, it's terrible to have paywalls persist when many cannot access that information to read the articles. But really, the more that I work in this space, especially with the program staff at the foundation, they're more interested in, especially the data. And the data is kind of where the magic is, whereas often articles can be described as the advertisements for the research and the work and the data. So having a reuse license, I think, is very important. We've actually had quite a few examples where authors approach us, they publish an article, and then they have to buy back the rights to be able to use figures and data from those articles. So that's a really important component, I think, when we talk about open access, is that reuse license. And that often can be overlooked when we focus too much on the economics and business models. So to me, this rainbow kind of goes from the most, I think, open access friendly to the least. So we have green open access, which is known also as self-archiving via repository. So authors can share a version of their manuscript in an open access repository. This does not affect the journal version of record, which often remains paywalled and has to be accessed via subscription. This is something that we've built up over the years in our policy. I think it's something that I've learned a lot from the library community, is very important of ensuring repository access for many reasons, also for archival as well. Platinum open access, or what's known as diamond, is something that's being talked about a lot more as more than just a business model, but also as an ethos where there's no cost to the author or the reader. It's subsidized by a funder or a country. This is how places like Latin America has a really strong open access ethic, and to them it's more of the norm because they've built their entire system around it because they've had to. And I think that's a really important example to learn from, and we've been engaging with those groups in other countries that have already kind of embraced this model and seen it be very successful. Hybrid open access is one of, I think, most persistent, especially for global North journals. Hybrid journal is one that still has the traditional subscription route, gets that revenue. They also have the option to pay to have an article be made open access. Some say that equates to double dipping. Publishers may say otherwise. And it's a real kind of conflict in the hybrid open access space. Plan S has been very against it. We've been trying to push for many years now for journals to go fully open access with fairly limited success success there, but it's an interesting model to see. It was meant to be kind of a transition, but I think often is we see, especially with the big commercial publishers, it's been a very secure additional revenue stream, so it's not going anywhere anytime soon. Bronze is one that we see a lot, where this is where I think it's important to really understand what open access means with that reuse license. This is basically when especially like during the pandemic, when paywalls were removed so they can get access right away, but there's no reuse component. The copyright is still held with the journal. So you can read it, but you can't engage or reuse or build upon any of that research without permission or additional fees. And then there's gold open access, which a lot of the fully open access publishers like PROS, Frontiers, MTPI, all have as their business model, where you do have to pay to publish there. There's no alternative paywall. And we are working with especially PLOS, which is, great open access publisher, really pro open science. So we're trying to work with them. They see where this the APC, the article processing charge open access model is inequitable, and are trying to pivot and find other options as well. And then Black open access, essentially known that, illegal means of getting a hold of articles, such as using Sci-Hub, which I would never recommend that anyone use, but if you haven't heard about it, I would look into it for article access. Some of the things that we've learned along the way in our open access journey, and things that I really, whenever I hear talks, or if I can just yell out into the room and say yes, but also open access doesn't have to equate for APCs. A lot of the discussions are around this, but again, there are other models that have been around for a while that are emerging. There are other options to make sure that readers nor authors have to face a per article fee. I think it's important to always call out that libraries have always borne this expense. Academic publishing is a $10 billion industry. Again, going back to who pays for what and who does the labor and the writing and the research and all of that, I think is important. And libraries, have continued to face a serials crisis, which hasn't been solved by open access and hasn't been solved by the article processing charges. Something that I think about more is I feel like we often have to always pay forever for an article. I mean, I will see articles that are older than I am, still paywalled. And while, it can be argued that money does then help with the newer publications, at some point, I think the paywall has to come down. And personally, I don't believe the hybrid models are the solution. I would like to see us get to a place where we have more of that diamond or platinum open access, where funders and institutions are subsidizing the infrastructure and the work that's being done in libraries, support that as well, so we don't have to face those individual fees. And again, highlighting why this is important. And as I continue along this journey and work, I'm constantly trying to challenge myself to think of how I can make sure that this aligns with the foundation's DEI goals. And I think that, equity is a huge component of it. And I also see that, often we are getting to a place where we're having these discussions more, but often authors from low or middle income countries are pointed to as look, they can't afford to pay to publish, they can't afford to read, or they have to ask for, waivers or handouts or inequitable processes. I've also seen the argument that when we publish in a paywall journal, we essentially are forcing our, fellow colleagues and researchers in LMIC areas to, jump through hoops, go without, or use illegal means to access that information. But they're also then left out of the conversation and how to fix and improve this. And that's what I'm trying to really take in when we think about our future policy and what we spend our money on. When we hear from other countries that, hey, we need help with infrastructure, or we have been doing it this way for a while, but it's kind of frowned upon by the global north. I think that's a real issue that we need to lean into more. And just in general, using publication venues as a proxy for career advancement is problematic. I mean, we could have a whole session on the impact factor. So we have so much evidence that the way that we are doing this now isn't serving our best needs, but change is hard. So the takeaways that I want to leave you with, one just from kind of what I do every day, day in, day out, is I really do believe that policy can bring about behavior change, where there's policy at a funder or policy at a journal. I think it's very important to set strong policies and enforce them to make sure we have change. Again, open access does not necessarily equate to expensive publishing, low quality, or lacking peer review. Those are kind of persistent myths in the open access space. Of course, there are cases of where that might be an issue, but it is not due to open access itself. I think we should, again, learn from the pandemic, when information flowed more easily and quickly, and kind of keep seeing that there are other issues that we are urgently trying to solve, and we shouldn't give up on making the system better to be able to solve those. Most publishers are unlikely to give up control. However, they rely on the research community a lot. So I'm constantly trying to have our grantees and researchers really advocate for themselves and what they need and want out of their research dissemination. I think that's very important. And the importance of partnering with, the good publishers and vendors whose missions, values, and actions align with our own is very important to me as well. And with that, I am on time, which is exciting. And yes, always happy to engage. Please, reach out. I'm always interested to talk. And I'm really passionate too about what we're doing with our Gates Open research work and platform, and happy to share more on that, and happy to answer any questions.
We were muted, Ashley. We're going to hit you with a question.
Hear me now?
Yes, I can hear.
Chris Dodgen, Medical College of Wisconsin. I work a fair amount in the global space. I really appreciated your talk. I just wondered, with what you're doing, do you have a sense of how much does it actually cost to publish an article?
That is an excellent question. Yeah, so several thoughts on that. So, we've never put a cap on like what we would support, and many funders don't. Some do, and when we thought about can we set a cap, we started kind of looking at answering that question, which is a very hard question to answer. But there is some great research out there that suggests reasonably about $1,000. I mean, of course, it depends on what we're exactly talking about, the kind of expertise that might be needed to review methods, any additional statistical or data components, and that's what adds in that cost. And a lot of what we base, kind of what we think it costs, is based off of our Gates Open Research experience, and that's employing the editors to actually do more intensive data checks than I think might be done sometimes with other journals, because typically when you peer review, you're not necessarily digging into the data if it's not something that the journal requires. So we're seeing with that kind of level of paid editorial work, along with newer kind of technology platform. This is also including the, media outreach communications, because readership is very important. So adding in, this is not adding in kind of the traditional subscription. So if you need to have sales and marketing in that sense, that cost isn't quite calculated. But I think the best number I've seen is around $1,000 to produce a digital article, say on a platform. But there are other ranges where there are examples where I like the number of it's $10 to post a preprint. I think, yes, great. And that shows that covers kind of the infrastructure of that, but we are then kind of missing the additional value added components. But I will tell you, it's not the $12,000 that Nature charges right now per article. And some of the things I see that we pay for have had no real, there's not a data component to it. Sometimes these are opinion pieces, and we're spending $4,000 to make sure that opinion piece is not paywalled. That is a very long way to kind of answer that question of, I think, around $1,000 for a research article with data underlying it. Which I should say and add to that is still out of reach often if we're looking at an author paying. But I think for looking at more of these subsidized models where the cost is being borne by, you know, a few institutions spread out, I think that's realistic.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Really appreciate it.